These days we're very used to the idea of cherished names from motoring past reappearing on what enthusiasts might deem an unsuitable modern product. These days it's usually some sort of gargantuan SUV, but that's not a new problem. In the 1950s, MG fans were getting very worked up about the appearance of a name from before the war on what they thought was an unsuitable car, and what they were getting so worked up about was the MG Magnette. So let's take it for a drive, go into the history, and let's see what they were so worked up about.
But first, our friends at Lancaster Insurance are running monthly giveaways. You can win all sorts, from experience days to tools, restaurant vouchers and tech. So click the link below at the end of the video to enter their latest competition.
So this is the controversial MG Z-Type Magnette, and looking at it you might think that's just a very standard looking British saloon car from the early 50s. What's the big deal? You may well think MG, sports car, it's the most famous of the British sports car brands, and it's the one that is most known for pretty much only making sports cars, but that's of course not quite right. MG had quite a tradition of making saloon cars. Of course, it started making souped up Morrises, but even by the 1950s the initials MG were synonymous with the two-seater classic sports car. MG was making two models, the T-Type, the midget, which was your typical two-seat lightweight roadster sports car, and they were making the Y-Type, which was the 1.25 litre saloon, introduced in the 1940s but planned in the 1930s, and that was a mishmash of T-Type and Morris 8, and that was surprisingly commercially successful and a bit of a critical hit. It was kind of like a 1940s version of one of those 1990s retro cars. Consider it like a BMW Mini or a Volkswagen New Beetle of the 90s, a car that stylistically and in its character harked back to previous era. The successor to the Y-Type was, going down the alphabet, the Z-Type. It is a very modern 1950s streamlined, integrated wings, integrated headlamps, monocoque car. It was a big change for MG enthusiasts. It was in fact MG's first unitary construction car. It was called the Magnette, and this was sort of almost calculated to get your typical MG enthusiast of 1952 quite agitated, because the Magnette was a 1930s sports car that had done very well on the racing and rallying circuit. The Magnette was the smaller version of the Magna, MG's bigger six-cylinder sports car of the 1930s. So you can see why, to your average MG fan in 1950, putting the name Magnette on a saloon was controversial, and it goes deeper than that. This was the first MG launched since the Nuffield Group, Morris, MG's parent company, was merged with Austin to form the British Motor Corporation, and therefore it was also the first MG to start using bits from the BMC parts bin. MGs up to that stage, since the late 30s, had all been powered by the Morris X Series engine, which in its day was a very advanced unit. It was one of the first mass production British engines to have overhead valve. That powered the Y-Type, the T-Type, but it didn't power the Magnette. The Magnette had the BMC B Series, which was off the Austin drawing boards. This is from the other side of the Great Divide. And in fact, the MG engineers themselves thought the B Series engine was inferior to their own unit. It's a bit cheaper, not quite as well engineered. So to sum up, the Magnette looked completely different to how people thought an MG should look, had foreign mechanical bits, and had a famous sports car name on a sports saloon, which is not what MG was known for. So it really ticked all the boxes of a car that was going to be controversial. If you're familiar with the history of MG, you'll know there's a pattern that whenever a new MG comes out, the existing band of MG enthusiasts are usually very dismissive of it. They usually find some reason why it's not a proper MG or why it's not as good as the model it's replaced or something like that. So it probably won't surprise you to learn, by the time Z-Type ended production, it was very well respected, and the MG scene had taken it to heart, and it had been seen for the very good car that it is. So we need to get into what was good. First, look at it. Stunningly pretty car. It is an absolutely brilliant bit of styling. The detailing and the proportions and the overall look of the thing is it's fantastic. It's a very graceful, well-proportioned, sleek-looking car, and it was the work of a man called Gerald Palmer, who's slightly overlooked these days, but really was something of an unsung genius. And he didn't skimp on the engineering either. As I said, it was MG's first unitary construction, the first monocoque. It's got independent coil spring front suspension, very well-located live rear axle, rides and handles very well. Got a nice wide stance and a long wheelbase. So this isn't a throwback like the Y-Type or the T-Type. It's a modern MG. And yeah, it has that B-Series engine. But of course the B-Series became the MG engine for the rest of MG's real existence, the 80s. It powered the MGA, the MGB. Here it's a 1.5, twin carbs, producing a little over 60 horsepower, and that's no great numbers. Compare it to a Morris Oxford or Austin Cambridge, it's good. It's got a good bit of poke, and of course, being a 1950s car, this doesn't weigh very much, so 60 horsepower, more than enough. You have to compare it as being a step up in the BMC family tree from, say, an Austin or a Morris, in terms of badge, performance, handling. And the interior, let's talk about the interior. MG Y-Type, the car that came before this, had a very well appointed interior, and the Z-Type absolutely built on that. It's had a full wooden dashboard. MG styling feature the octagonal or half octagonal speedometer. The whole thing looks a bit like a radiogram with these lovely inset styles with the backlighting. Floor mounted gear change back in a day when most ordinary family saloons had column shifts and bench seats. You've got your green leather seats, green leather door trim, green leather, again a very typical MG interior feature of the time. So it's a very well appointed, very comfy, premium car, but it's in a small package. On that basis, it stacks up very well. It sits really nicely on the road, it's very stable. Steering isn't anything great to say, it hasn't got a huge amount of slop, it's actually very accurate, it's nice and responsive, the turn-in's crisp, it steers very nicely, picks up speed well. Let's give it the beans. Sounds good. It's got a nice, the actual shift is lovely, nice and smooth. I haven't missed a gear change. It's definitely got a sporty character, but it isn't a sporty car, but it's very capable. I think MG judged it absolutely perfectly. It really is a modern MG. It's got the sporting spirit of an MG put into what was for its time a very modern car. Modern in looks, modern in appointments, modern in engineering, modern in handling. A car for someone who appreciates handling, wants a little bit of extra performance, a car that is still very accessible and you can use every day. The Magnette's just got that in spades. It's absolutely spot on, and that's why enthusiasts who were so put out by it when it was launched came round to it in the end. And it would be a brilliant classic today as well. It's a 1950s car, unmistakably. It drips with 1950s style and character, but it's got the performance and the handling and the comfort and the refinement. Mechanically, it all uses BMC parts, so the parts situation would be fine. So there we go, MG Z-Type Magnette. The perfect package in the 1950s, and still the perfect package now.
This video is proudly sponsored by Lancaster Insurance. Give them a call on 01480 400 889 for an insurance quote on your classic car. And don't forget to click the link below to enter their latest competition.